Hey everyone, I hope you all having a good evening, afternoon, happy Halloween, whatever. This presentation I had originally done when I was in London last year, which is when I first got involved with afikra. Right now I'm actually based in Abu Dhabi, and as Mikey mentioned before, representing as ambassador here. So hello to everyone in Abu Dhabi and also around the world. I'm gonna start with this article that really caught my eye when I read it. The title is posing the question, did the Italian Renaissance actually begin in Baghdad? And if you be patient with me for a little bit, there's a couple steps to get there, but it starts out with a guy in a couple hundred years before the Renaissance even starts and his inventions. And the article that my talk is based on today is linked here in case you guys want to do some more in-depth reading. But this kind of goes into all the different aspects of this inventor's life and how it influenced the Italian Renaissance. And so who are we talking about today? We're talking about Ibn al-Haytham. He's also known in like Western Latinized version of his name by the name Al-Hazin. He was born in modern-day Basra, Iraq, in the year 965, so way before the Renaissance painters and all those guys even got started. And what he was kind of, like you say, a Renaissance man. He was involved in mathematics, astronomy, physics, engineer. He wrote books about philosophy, theology, medicine. Your typical all-around Arab overachiever. So one of his claims as this sort of genius engineer he became well known as was he claimed to be able to solve this problem that people were having in Egypt, where each year the Nile would flood. And it was an engineering problem that would ruin the land and crops and everything like that. So he said, I have the perfect solution. So he went over from Iraq to Egypt and said, I have the solution, let me work out this problem. Well, it ends up he didn't. He actually totally failed in providing a solution. And the ruler at the time got very mad and was very unpleased, because he made him look foolish. He's something that he claimed to be able to solve, and the ruler believed him. So now he has to be punished for failing to complete on his word. And the story goes that what he did was he feigned insanity, like he pretended he was just crazy, so that they wouldn't execute him. And they lightened his sentence to imprisonment or actually house arrest. And so, I guess maybe we're familiar with this year with the whole quarantine, what that's kind of like. But during this time of his house arrest, it actually became something that was beneficial, because during that time, he was able to sit down and write down all of his discoveries and things like that. And he worked on the book of optics for about a decade during this time. After the ruler at the time died and he was released from his imprisonment, he was able to, publish it and distribute it. But he used that time while he was under house arrest to be able to write down all his findings and discoveries. And basically what the book of optics is about is the study of light and the way light travels through the human eye, the way light travels through lenses, all kinds of things. But basically anything related to the way light worked, he wrote all about it. And he was very accurate, actually, when it was a very modern book of discoveries for the time period. He even corrected a lot of scientific discoveries that the ancient Greeks had made, and he kind of expanded upon those. So it was a very important and influential, discovery in science. Now, the story goes that one day while he was in this house imprisonment, he was sitting in his dark room, probably very sad, and he noticed that the light was passing through a very small hole through the window or through a curtain or something like that. And it not just allowed light into the room and project into the room and illuminated it through this small hole, but it actually also created a projection of the outside surroundings. And this projection was actually flipped upside down. And if you're familiar with kind of how eyes work, your eye takes in light through the lens, and when it reaches the optical nerve, it actually hits the back of the eye in a sort of reversed image, and then your brain kind of flips that over. And it's also similar to how the cameras work, you know, the old-fashioned, not pre-smartphone cameras. They would take, you know, a small amount of light through the lens, through an aperture, small opening, and that reversed image hits the film, and then you develop it, and then it becomes this beautiful right side up photograph. And so this phenomenon is called camera obscura, which is Latin for dark room. The article also makes an argument that the word camera could be also derived from the Arabic word qamra, meaning room or dark chamber. And this discovery was basically kind of the kickstart to, you know, later on, many hundreds of years later, discovering photography, and also had an impact on a lot of other scientific discoveries. And later we will see how it ended up actually influencing Renaissance art. So many centuries pass after Alhazen, you know, lived and died, but his work lived on. His book during the Renaissance times became translated and also ended up influencing the scientists and artists that were working during that time. It was a time period of a lot of scientific discovery, a lot of advancements in the way art was made, a lot of different experimentation with different styles and things like that. And so, as you can see here on this little image on the right, this is taken from one of Da Vinci's notebooks. And if you aren't familiar, Da Vinci was an artist and well known as an artist in the Renaissance, but he was also an inventor. He had notebooks filled with all kinds of inventions, and he was very scientifically minded, not just looking at things from the point of view of an artist. So this image shows something that's very similar to Al-Hazen's work or Ibn al-Haytham's work, where you see the light. He's looking through kind of a lens contraption over here, examining the proportions of the globe that's here. And you can see he's sort of drawn out how the light travels through the lens and how it travels to him as the observer. So these kinds of tools were actually used to assist painters during the Renaissance. It helped them achieve these really unique 3D perspectives, whereas prior to that, paintings were a little bit more simple, a little bit more two-dimensional. But with the use of these optic tools and them being widely used, we were able to kind of get a revived look into paintings. This is an example of a Da Vinci painting. As you can see, it's not like how paintings were before, where they were very simple portraits with a simple background. This has a lot of depth to it. It's rendered in a three-dimensional way. You see a lot of perspective lines drawn here. Objects that are far away are drawn smaller, to give the illusion that the painting is not just a painting, it's almost like a window that you're looking into a full scene. And so with the use of like a camera obscura, the artist can take a look at the scene in front of them, and because of the projection, they can trace the 3D environment onto the surface of their canvas and paint on top of that. So that way they're able to get these really accurate perspectives and accurate dimensions and make things look really realistic. And this invention even continued to be used even after the Renaissance. This is an example of an artist who built his own kind of camera obscura, where he was in this dark room, and you can see his subject over here, and how the image of his subject and the background as well was basically projected onto the canvas, and he's able to trace and from there do all the details in the painting. So it was a wonderful tool to be able to advance art and really push the limit on what art can look like, and the realism and the accuracy that it can achieve. And I thought I would wrap up the presentation with this wonderful quote that's attributed to Leonardo da Vinci. And he says it's important for people to really study the science of art as well as study the art of science. I thought that really tied in really well to how the scientific discoveries that happened way long ago by Ibn al-Haytham actually ended up influencing Da Vinci's art. And he also shouts out to develop your senses, especially learning how to see, which is, I thought, also a really interesting connection to Ibn al-Haytham's work on optics and how the eye can see. And then Da Vinci says that you should realize that everything connects to everything else. And I find this quote to be really true. You know, science and art and all the other disciplines that are interconnected really work together to influence each other, to help each other develop and make advancements. So things that are advancements in science and discoveries that happen in the scientific world can actually have an impact on the art world, and vice versa as well. Ibn al-Haytham's drawings and illustrations in his book of optics helped advance science. So this is especially important, and not just different sort of academic subjects that connect to each other, but also different cultures. As you can see, some discovery that happened all the way in Iraq ended up having an influence on the Renaissance, and discoveries and advancements that happened in Italy many centuries later. So I thought this was a really wonderful quote that helped really shed light on how everything connects to everything. And if you'd like some further reading, the article recommends checking out this book. It's called Florence and Baghdad, Renaissance Art and Arab Science. So it talks about the interconnection between those two worlds. And I find that very interesting. And then also the subject of photography didn't just end up in the Arab world, didn't end with Ibn al-Haytham. Photography obviously flourished in the Arab world, but I thought I would shout out this really interesting presentation from our afikra archives, presentation by Layla on the first female photographer in Palestine, and I've linked it here in case anyone's interested to check it out. I highly recommend it. It's a very interesting story. And I'd like to thank you all for your time and hope you learned something new.